This happened a few days ago, and I'm still pretty shaken about it. I only just got to post it here, so here goes. On Friday afternoon, I got a call from my friend named Sarah asking if I wanted to meet her and another friend named Lisa at Dunkin' Donuts, as we hadn't seen one another in a while. Dunkin' Donuts is a 15-minute walk from my house, so I decided I would walk. Besides, the weather was fine. I got to Dunkin' Donut and found where Sarah and Lisa were sat. So I went to join them. As we were chatting, I noticed that my sister Elena was sat at a table in the corner of the room with her friend Jess. For context, my sister and her friend are both 18 years old. My sister still lives with my parents, whereas I live alone. I excused myself from the table and went over to Elena and Jess's. They were sat at a table with 3 seats, so I went to sit down and say hey. They both jumped a bit, but then looked more relieved than anything to see me. Immediately Helena whispered to me, "Don't look now," but the guy in the blue shirt, I think he's been following Jess, and I glan over and I saw the middle-aged man sat at a table facing away from us. He's passed our table a good 5 times in the past 20 minutes to go to the bathroom, but he walks slower as he passes us. She continued. I told them that they were most likely being paranoid and that there was nothing to worry about, but for their peace of mind, I offered to leave with them so they wouldn't feel as worried. I walked back over to my table and explained the situation to Sarah and Lisa. Both of them laughed it off and assumed my sister to be paranoid. Literally about a minute later, I saw the man get up from his seat and walk toward the bathroom. My eyes followed him, and sure enough, he walked extremely slow past Elena and Jess. In fact, it was almost comical how obviously slow he became. Both Elena and Jess looked in my direction, and I nodded to show that I had seen him walk slower. About 5 minutes later, I went into the toilets. On my way, I passed Elena and Jess and told them I was ready to leave. Whenever they were, they both agreed that they were ready to leave now. I told them that I was just going to the bathroom and that we could leave after I had done my business. Elena had come in her car, so she was going to give me a lift back. I went into the toilet stall, did set business, washed my hands. I was walking down the corridor back to the main eating area when Elena and Jess rushed into the corridor. I asked them what's up, and they explained that another man had joined the strange, creepy man, and that the men were both pointing and staring at them, so they rightfully felt unsafe. We walked back into the eating area. I put my money on our table and explained to Lisa and Sarah that I was taking off and I would explain what was going on when I got home. We all got into Elena's car and left the creeps in the rear view mirror. After about a 2-minute drive, we reach my house. Just then I remembered that I'd been meaning to return something I had borrowed from my mother, so I asked if Elena could drive me to my parents' house as she was going there anyway. I jumped out of the car to get what I needed when my phone rang. It was Elena. She explained that a car had driven past and had pulled into a driveway. She said the driver of the vehicle was the creep from Dunkin' Donuts. I looked out of my window, and sure enough, there was a car which didn't belong to the owner of the house parked on their driveway. I got the girls into my house and locked the door. I instructed Elena to take a photo of the car and its license plate. I told Jess to call 911 as she could give the operator more information than what I could. Elena took the photos, and we sort of gathered around Jess as she was speaking to the operator. She had finished telling the story, and I heard the operator assure us that the police would be at my house soon. A few minutes passed, and there was a loud knock at the front door, followed by a loud voice shouting, "It's the police." We all did a sigh of relief. As I went to open the door, Jess told the operator that the police were here, and she hung up. I was in the process of unlocking the door when I thought to look through the spy hole at the top of it. I peered through, and it wasn't a police officer. It was the same guy. I froze in fear, and I didn't know what to say. "We didn't call the police," I managed to shout back to the man through the door. Elena and Jess were both confused as to why I said this. "We had a call, sir," the man shouted back. "You have the wrong address," I yelled back. Andy'd informed the girls that it was the creep at the door and not a police officer. Both were rightfully shocked and extremely scared, as was I. I was about to tell Jess to call the police again until I heard the sirens. "Sir, you have to let me in," the man shouted again. This time I didn't answer. He was pounding on the door. His commands for me to let him in turned into be begging and pleading. I heard the police car pull up and some commotion outside. An actual police officer knocked on the door, and I let him in. Yes, I checked the spy hole first. The police Officers took the man into custody, while another police officer took Elena and Jess into the dining room for some brief questioning. I called my parents, and Jess called hers. Both were here extremely quickly. Once we told them what had happened, the man was found with a kitchen knife on his person and some other weapons in his car. Who knows what could have happened if I hadn't looked through the spy hole first. Both my sister and her friend are fine, just a bit shaken up after the whole incident. So guy who stalked my sister and her friend, let's not meet. This happened about 4 years ago. I was 20 at the time. The first time I met the guy who would become my grocery store stalker, he was standing outside the store collecting money for the Salvation Army Christmas donations. I'm a fairly friendly person, so I like to say hi to people who work at places I frequent to be nice. This guy was a kid around my age, very tall, with a mild resemblance to Lurch from the Addams Family. Dark circles under the eyes, short black hair, a kind of vacant look in his eyes. I chatted with him for maybe 2 minutes, just idle chit-chat about the weather and whatnot, nothing particularly memorable or interesting. I then waved goodbye and went home. Little did I know that single moment would be the story part of something that would have me genuinely afraid. About 4 or 5 months passed, and I didn't see him again. Then one day, as I was grocery shopping with a friend, as we were chatting, she suddenly got real quiet and kind of recoiled backwards. Looking behind me, I turned around to see this guy, who had to be at least 6 feet 4 inches, towering over me, not 8 in from my body. He said hi and told me he remembered me from that December when I talked to him, and then he asked for my number. I, being young and never having experienced this type of interaction before, told him I didn't have my number memorized, but that I would write his down and text him later. I kind of half waved my phone at him, pointing out my at the time boyfriend, whose picture was my wallpaper, making a point to say, "Oh look, that's my boyfriend," to the guy, hoping he would clue in, but no luck. He told me his number, which upon immediately getting I blocked without letting him get my phone number. However, what really made my blood run cold was what he said after I put my phone away. He leaned in real close, and in a low voice he told me, "Whatever I text you is for your eyes only." At this point I started to feel genuinely uncomfortable. I said, "Yeah, sure, nice talking to you, but we got to get back to shopping," and I grabbed my friend and dragged her off, shooting a panicked look at her and asking her why she didn't bail me out. Apparently he scared her too with his getting so close to me, and she didn't know what to do. I want to make it clear, I'm not exactly a small girl. At 5 feet 8 inches and solidly built, I can certainly handle myself, and I very rarely feel intimidated or small in the presence of anyone, male or female, but this guy made me feel tiny and scared. In the months that would follow, he would make me feel truly frightened. I had hoped that creepy interaction would be the last time I saw him, but that was unfortunately not the case. After that initial meeting with him, saying that creepy thing about his texts being for my eyes only, it seemed like I would run into him every single time that I got to the store. No matter what checkout lane I was in, he always seemed to appear at the end of it when I was finished shopping. And every time I was in the store, I would notice him out of the corner of my eye, watching me no matter what area I was in. One time, I even caught him following me out to my car. At that point, I got scared and decided to say something to the managers. After letting the managers know what was going on, they assured me that they would tell him not to talk to me. After that, he wouldn't speak to me, but I would continue to see him following me around the store at a distance. Every time that I went up there, it got so bad, and I felt so frightened that I started to be afraid to go to the store at all. But I'm one of those stubborn people who refuse to be intimidated by someone to the point where I'll stop doing something. I had hoped that maybe it was a coincidence that he was following me. After all, it was a big store, and maybe he just had things to do that happened to be in the areas I was shopping in. So I started to pay close attention to my surroundings. Once I started really paying attention, I realized that every single time I was up there, I would constantly notice him in the areas of the store I was in. During my last encounter with him, I went up to the store to grab just 2 or 3 items that I needed for dinner that night, and I first saw him standing outside the store when I got there, and with his back to me, I quickly ran inside, hoping he didn't see me. Unfortunately, a few minutes later, I saw him at the very back of the store, and items in hand, I immediately made a beeline towards the front. As soon as I got near the checkout, I ducked behind one of the shelf displays and watched carefully at the front of the store to see if the creep would appear, and he did. I watched as he looked up and down the checkout, and when he didn't see me there, I saw him step outside. At this point, I quickly ran to the nearest open cashier, rang up my items, and stuck my head out the door to look for him. I didn't see him there immediately, so I started trying to make my way back to where I was parked. I had parked a ways away near the side of the store where a bunch of other small stores and restaurants were lined up, and as I was walking towards my car, I realized I saw him standing by the entrance that I'd first entered the store through. I ducked behind a pillar immediately, hoping he didn't see me. I watched carefully from behind the pillar, and as he scanned the parking lot, he obviously couldn't find me. After a minute or two, he started to walk out towards the direction of the parking lot in front of the store, and so I took that opportunity to make a run for it to my car as soon as he was far enough away that I felt safe. As soon as I got into my car, I locked the doors, and to my horror, when I looked up, he was standing there about 15 feet from my car with a shopping cart in front of him. I knew he followed me. He knew I fully believe he had chased after me, and when I made it to my car, he grabbed the nearest cart to make it look like he was collecting them from the parking lot. I remember just feeling absolutely terrified at that moment. I went home and immediately told my grandfather what had happened. I began crying and shaking. My grandfather told me to get into the car, that we were going to settle this. He and I drove up to the store in his car, and he walked me into the store and demanded that we spoke with the managers immediately, both of them. When the manager arrived at customer service, he asked me to tell them what had been happening and demanded that they ensure he left me alone or that he would involve the police. The manager swore up and down they would take care of it. As far as I know, he wasn't fired immediately, because my friend who encountered him with me when this whole thing began told me that she would see him from time to time when she was there by herself, but that any time that I went with her she would never see him. I fully believe he knew whenever I was there, only this time, instead of stalking me, he avoided me. Eventually everyone who knew the situation stopped seeing him there, so I think he may have gotten fired or moved on from that store. Either way, I haven't had any issues since, but I have never in my life felt so afraid of another human being as I did that day, seeing him make eye contact with me in the parking lot as I locked my car doors. It still creeps me out to think that he was watching me so closely every time I entered the store, that he could so easily avoid or follow me whenever he wanted. So to the guy who stalked me every time I went grocery shopping for 4 months straight, let's never meet again. In October of 2016, a longtime family friend began harassing my family, so I've known this guy since I was around 5. He worked at my dad's friend's car dealership as the person who basic ally maintains the exteriors, washes the car, shines them, and whatever else. My parents became fond of him because he looked very sweet, and they felt pity for him as he had horrible hygiene habits. They'd often buy him food, gift him clothes, and things of that sort. Around 2015, this man gets a job right across the street from my mom's job. He saw my mom one morning and they just waved at each other. This man starts calling my mom frequently. Now my mom is extremely nice, too nice, so instead of just not picking up, she would talk to him. This guy becomes obsessed with my mom to the point that she tells him to stop contacting her. Around May of 2016, all is well. The guy stops contacting my mom. Months later, he began to watch my mom. He would park his car in front of my mom's job and watch her. She noticed him, but she never saw it as a huge threat, so she never said anything. That's where things escalate. My mom was walking out of work with a coworker one day, normal coworker friendship. My mom catches a ride with her coworker to a mandatory work event so she wouldn't have to drive home too late, as these events end late at night. Meanwhile, the guy is watching them walk to his car. He suddenly thinks that my mom is having an affair with this guy and then decides to follow them. They arrive at the work event and my mom stays in the car while her coworker goes inside to check if it's the right location. The stalker walks up to the car, opens the door, slaps my mom, grabs a knife from his car and slashes the coworker's tires. My mom is in complete shock and immediately calls her coworker to come outside. The coworker decides to not press any charges against him, even though he easily could have, as there were cameras outside the location. Now my mom mentions none of this to my dad because my dad is really explosive to the point that he will get into trouble over this guy, so everything is okay for A couple of days until this guy starts calling my mom non-stop and leaving her. Threatening voicemails. The voicemails said things along the lines of, if you don't meet me up at a hotel on Wednesday at 1 p.m. I'm going to tell your husband you're cheating on him. This scares my mom because my dad has a past with domestic violence, so she's scared my dad will believe him and beat her. Wednesday comes along, and when she gets to work he's outside watching her. He spends the whole day watching her. She calls my grandparents. They're not that old, as my grandpa is ex-military, ex-judoka, and is no one to play with. They immediately drive to my mom's job, but this guy starts harassing my grandparents and won't leave my mom's job. 1 p.m. comes around and my mom calls the police. The guy hauls across the street and hides, leaving his car at my mom's job. The police search for him everywhere, but he's nowhere to be found. The phone calls continue and things escalate. This man decides to vandalize my mom's car. He throws tar all over my mom's car while the car's parked outside my house. The car is destroyed and my parents have to pay a lot of money to be able to fix it. At this point my dad knows of the whole ordeal and is set on killing this guy. We advise him to calm down because my mom is planning on getting a restraining order from him, and she didn't want my dad to ruin her chances or to commit a crime. He continues calling and stands outside my mom's job every day. This man starts driving by my house every day and begins to see me as a target. He leaves my mom a threatening voicemail saying he's going to vandalize my car. So at this point I'm even more terrified. At this point in the story my mom has had to call the cops on him several times, but the cops say they can't do anything as he hasn't physically attacked her. My mom decides she's going to finally petition for the restraining order. She's going to use the police reports and voicemails as proof. They set up a court date and give my mom a temporary restraining order until the court date, so approximately 2 weeks. This guy does not stop calling my mom, so my mom calls the detective in charge of her case, and the guy hasn't even been served with the restraining order yet. Bear in mind this is a few days before the court date. He was notified with the court date though, so he tells my mom he has proof that she won't stop calling him. He then starts targeting the rest of us. I wake up one Saturday morning and my car has letters drawn all over the windows with nail polish. Luckily we were able to just scrape it off gently, but by now I'm a nervous wreck. I start doing bad in my classes and I haven't slept for about a month. He then begins to harass my dad with voicemails and phone calls, but luckily my dad didn't buy any of his. Finally the court date arrives. This man shows up with his stepson, and his stepson starts talking to my mom because of course he only knows this man's side of the story. The judge calls them in and does the usual questioning, talks about police reports and whatever else. The judge asks him if he has anything to say or show. He says, yes, I have a phone bill that shows she called me more than 200 times in the past month. The judge says, okay, show me. Guess what? He didn't bring it. There's no such thing. The judge nods her head and says, okay, I've reached the verdict. He was found guilty and my mom was awarded a restraining order for life. We finally have peace in our family again. So family stalker, you let's not meet again. So here is the story. I work at a chain grocery store and I work out in a small kiosk fuel center that sells cigarettes, soda candy, and whatever else. It's basically a small shack. I work out there by myself 90% of the time unless we happen to be double covered, which happens rarely. A week or so ago a regular comes to the kiosk. The guy's kind of a douche, but if you get through his request quickly enough things aren't terrible. He looks for a minute and asks me for the cigarettes on sale. Most of our cigarettes had a sale going on, so this made my job exponentially harder. Considering I had to guess between 30 to 40 packs of cigarettes, it took me 4 or 5 tries to guess which one he wanted, and he was curing and degrading me the whole time. I shrug it off for now, because I deal with things like that 10 or 15 times a day, but the amount he was doing it was slightly annoying. It comes time to pay, and the guy is short on money and says to me, all right, I'm short, but I know you have all the money in there, so you can cover the rest of what I owe you. I normally cover people if they're short and haven't been acting like a dick, but he straight told me to cover the remainder. I tell him no, if he doesn't have the money he needs to buy other cigarettes or not get them at all. He starts getting pissed at my response. He already had been bitching at me at the amount of tax that existed on the cigarettes and accused me of overcharging him. This just set him off further. After a while he starts threatening me and tell me he's going to have me fired. I tell him I'm denying him service and to get off the lot while grabbing the phone to call my managers to come out and get rid of this guy. The whole time this is happening, the customer is screaming bloody murder. He's acting like I shot his dog in front of him. He's screeching that much. My managers eventually come out and they take care of him and get him off the lot. I've dealt with people like him before, so I don't think anything of it. I just try to finish my shift and go home. I have a few days off, and when I come back to work, two of my coworkers tell me that he'd come up an hour before my shift with 2 cars fulls of people, and he was asking them when I clocked in next and where I lived. My coworkers told them that they couldn't give information like that out, and if they had an issue with me to talk to my managers. I'm starting to feel a bit nervous, but I try to write it off, thinking they'd get bored or just give up since they've missed me a couple days ago. I was at work, and I looked up to see him in his car with a couple of his friends, and they were driving slowly by the kiosk. The guy was straight staring me down the whole time and pointing at me. Now at this point I'm freaked out, so I called my manager and they have me on security escorts. They told me to take a few days off to hide away from him. I doubt the guy's going to hunt me down or try to follow me home, but I'm still in a minor state of dread that I'm going to run into him when I go grab groceries or even meet one of my buddies for a drink. This was about 4 or 5-ish years ago. Back then I lived with my mother in a shed on a farm surrounded by woodland. Our farmland was part of a larger piece of farmland that was split up and sold off, so we did have neighbors, although they were roughly half a kilometer each way. We loved that because of the privacy. It wasn't like there was nobody nearby I couldn't go to if I needed help. That thought is what had me fearlessly walking alone at night between the hours of 7 to 8 p.m., sometimes fluctuating from earlier to later depending on the day. Sometimes I even went out on a walk at 2 a.m. in the morning because I was restless and couldn't sleep. Looking back, this was incredibly stupid, and after this incident I never walked after 6 p.m. ever again, always making sure there was at least some sunlight when I set out. The route I always took was a road circuit. The first part was out in the open in front of all the other farms, including my own. If anything had happened, at least one person would have noticed, and reception was pretty good, so I would have also been able to call someone. The second half, on the other hand, was concealed by about 200 m of woods between the farms and the back road stretching the full 2 kilometers at the back of the farm, and it was during that part of the walk when I had this creepy encounter. It was late at night. I can't remember what time exactly, but it was pitch black with the exception of my torchlight. I was about to approach the turn in the loop that would bring me out into the open again when I heard it. Help. It was in this monotone voice that repeatedly asked for help. It didn't seem panicked in the least. I took my earphones out and turned off my music to make sure I was hearing correctly, but it didn't stop. Help, help. A very stupid part of me almost responded because for some reason my first instinct was, oh no, someone's in trouble, like a naive kid, even though I would have been like 16 or 17 at the time, of course. Then my brain kicked in and I realized that approaching that voice was just about the stupidest thing I could do, so I started quietly backing away. Unfortunately, my cat had followed me on the walk and wasn't backing away with me. No, she was walking towards the voice, softly hissing. I remember desperately trying to get her to come back towards me without alerting the voice to my presence, just in case they hadn't noticed me yet, but I was getting scared and didn't want to stay there a moment more, so I ran forward and grabbed her. I turned around and bolted back towards my house. I don't know if it was stupid of me to turn my back to the voice, as I was making so much noise while running that there was no way they didn't know I was there, and I had no way of knowing if they were giving chase. I was so terrified. The whole time the image of someone cloaked in shadows chasing me entered my mind, and even though I couldn't hear anyone behind me, I never once slowed down until I was back safe and sound within my house. It doesn't end there though. Despite how terrifying it was, there was still a part of me that was concerned about whoever it was, because what if they really had needed help? So I asked my mother to drive us to the location. Another very stupid decision, considering what we found. That being not nothing, we called out and called out, but nobody answered. We didn't get out of the car, though luckily neither of us were that stupid. We drove home having seen nothing and no one, but it still bothered me in the morning, so I had my mother drive us over again, and we searched the immediate area. Nothing, no indication that anyone had been there. There was no body, which admittedly was a drastic thing to search for, but I know shock can leave you eerily calm, which could have explained the monotone voice, and the lack of response afterwards made me fear. That we'd been too late, and that we'd find a body in the morning. I don't know if I would have preferred this outcome, because at least then I would have had a face to the voice, but no, we found absolutely nothing, and to this day I have no idea who that voice belonged to and why they were monotonously calling out for help. My mind has naturally come to some chilling conclusions and theories that leave me unable to sleep. A kidnapper, a serial killer, all the classic horror stories, but I guess I'll never really know for sure. Several years ago, when I was 25, I lived with, at the time, one of my best friends. Our friendship eventually started to dwindle, as it usually goes when you move in with a good friend, so she was rarely home this night. However, she ended up staying at our place, heading to bed early. I was a server at the time, so I stayed up pretty late watching YouTube and smoking pot. This night was no different than any other, except for the fact my neighbors tried to kidnap me. I'll go ahead and give you some background information on my house and my neighbors. We lived in a 3-bedroom house with 2 bedrooms and the kitchen facing the crazy neighbors. They were a younger couple living in a smaller mill house. They were constantly coming to our door asking for handouts. Now, normally I'd be happy to help a neighbor out, but they would come over and ask for crazy like for us to fill up an old Mountain Dew bottle with water because there's got shut-off beer, and once literally to ask for $1. They would consistently be knocking at our door to ask for help, and when we wouldn't answer, I peeked through the window to see them either jacking cigarette butts from the ashtray or pressing their eyeballs against the door peephole to see if they could spot us. Anyway, there I was smoking weed and watching YouTube on my couch. When I heard a knock at the door, I rolled my eyes because I knew exactly who came. A knock, and it's 11 p.m. at night, by the way. I checked the peephole, and sure enough, the boyfriend was on my porch. Normally, I just walk away and continue on with my life, but he looked like he was in distress. I opened the door up to see what was up. He said, I just wanted to come over here and see if you would film my engagement. I got my girlfriend of ring here in my pocket, and I need you to follow me to my backyard and film it for me. Baffled but curious, I told him congratulations and said that I'd be out in a second. I just needed to put my shoes on. I shut the door behind me and locked it. I quickly ran to the back room that looked out into their backyard. I peeked through the blinds to see the setup. Nothing, pitch black darkness. There was no sign of decorations or anything like that. Naturally, I woke my roommate up and told her what was going on. Oh yeah, that she said to me, and we both walked back up to the door after the boyfriend started banging on it. I looked through the peephole again. I couldn't see anything, and I was confused all the way up until he pulled his eye away from the peephole. I quickly turned around and put my back against the door. My roommate came running back to the door from her room, manning 2 wire hangers for protection. We both clung onto the hangers and sat up against the door until he finally left. We were so freaked out, but we wanted to make sure we weren't overreacting. My friend and I left through the back door, and we hopped into her car so we could drive by. They always had their front door open and also didn't have any blinds, so it was easy to see into their house. Slowly we crept by in her car and peered into their living room, sitting on the couch and all staring at the wall. They looked strung out, was the couple and an older man. We sped off and ended up staying at a friend's house that night. I never answered the door for either of them again. One day, I came home from work and an older lady was parked in their driveway. She walked up to me as I got out of my car, and she asked if I knew where the neighbors were. I told her I hadn't seen them for a while, and she informed me she was the owner. She told me they were months late on rent and finally came to evict them. She entered the home to find it completely trashed. Needles and garbage everywhere, holes in the wall and literal on the floor. I told her I was sorry to hear that she had to deal with all of that, but I was happy they were finally gone. I'm not 100% sure what was going on gone that night, but I'm glad I did not follow him to the backyard. This happened in December a couple of years ago. I started working a job in the mall and had to work for most of Boxing Day. I was done at 10 p.m. and transits seemed to have ended at 7 o'clock. I'm a student who didn't go home for the holidays due to this job and never had to deal with holiday transit hours. I decided to call an Uber, and the driver picked me up right in front of the mall. We had a casual conversation during the drive back, and he learned about where I worked and how I'm living on my own for the time being since my roommates went to their hometowns. Fast forward to the next day at work around 6 p.m. This driver Walks into the store and tries to strike a conversation with me, but I told him I had to get back to work. He also asked if we could hang out later, to which I said no, and he left at the end of that shift at about 10 p.m. I walked out of the store planning to take transit. As soon as I stepped out of the store, the driver immediately pulled up next to me and offered to give me a free ride back home after going back and forth with me declining and him saying it's free. I decided to walk away and caught a bus home. I was pretty overwhelmed by the fact he showed up to my workplace and waited 3 hours until I was done with work to offer me a ride home. I've reported this to Uber and they've notified me that they've suspended this driver, provided me with a full refund, and gave me a link to provide to the police if I plan on filing a report. Silly of me to give away information like that to a stranger, but I hope to never meet that driver again, who appeared twice my age, knows where I work, and live lesson alert. 110%. I work at a national park at night in New England. I'm a zoologist. Well, it was a few years ago. In December there was a bit of snow falling, and the temperature was near 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Anyways, I was driving through the forest in my truck when I saw a van with its lights off in the woods. I stopped and I'm sure I heard the van with its engine on. It was a different sound than my trucks. It was odd, but I thought it was some teens or someone camping about 10 me deeper in the woods in a valley. I stopped because I saw a herd of the animals I'm supposed to monitor. I was looking for calves when I heard squealing brakes. I quickly got back into the truck and got my rifle ready. I began driving around the valley, and then I saw a silhouette descending from the hills. I was sure this had to do with the van. The guy started walking towards me. I noticed he was holding something long, so I aimed the truck toward him and read the engine. Then I began driving towards them, but they kept coming towards the truck. Now, I was raised in a small town in the Southwest, so I'm used to weirdos. I got down with my rifle and he started running up the hill. A few moments later, I heard this man drive off. I'm from a small Midwestern town I'm sure you've never heard of, and you never will. It wasn't even a DOT on the map. Just 761 people on their own in the middle of nowhere. That's why I'm telling this story, so that someone knows what happened here. I remember as a kid we used to play in the cornfield all the time. We lived on a farm just outside of town. The sidewalk literally began 1 block away from our house. It wasn't much, a single main street with a general store, drugstore, and hardware store. The grocery store and diner were around the corner just off the main street. The only reason we had a post office is because the nearest town was 20 m away. It was the kind of place even Norman Rockwell would miss if he drove through. My brother, sister, and I didn't have a lot of toys or games, so we played and seek almost non-stop with a few of the other neighborhood kids. We tried playing around the house, but with there usually being 6 or 7 of us, it was just too easy. The best time was during the summer after the corn got above our heads. Nobody wanted to be the seeker then because it was literally impossible to find anyone. Games would go on for hours with no one found. Our mom would have to come out and yell for us to come in for meals. The best part of hiding was when the seeker walked right past you. The excitement and sheer terror as you held your breath and tried to stay as still as possible was incomparable. I'd nearly pee my pants if the seeker stopped right beside me. There was that moment when you didn't know if they had no clue where you were or if they knew and they were just toying with you. There were a couple of times when the seeker was toying with me and they would stop right beside where I was hiding, then take a step or two and lunge back and grab me. I screamed both times. Not the "oh you got me" squeal that kid saint, I mean serious blood curdling someone is trying to murder me scream. My mother came running to make sure I was okay, and I got into trouble for scaring her so bad I usually had to sit out the next turn as punishment, watching the cornstalks sway in end as the pursuers hunted down there. Pray the fun suddenly changed when the strangers came to town. I remember there were a lot of strangers around during that time in my life. By strangers I don't mean people who act odd. They acted much more than odd. Remember when you were a kid and you dressed up as a superhero, you acted like the superhero, you were dressed like, you would talk like him, walk like him, pretend you had the powers he had. You just did everything you could to fool anyone into thinking you were that superhero. This was the same, only these people seemed to be dressed up, pretending to be people. It was weird. We would go to town and some of them would just be standing around, pretending to be nonchalant. They were staring at nothing. Not the 1,000-mile stare some people have, but literally staring at the strangest things. An old man in a rocking Chair in front of the general store would sit staring at an unlit street light in the middle of the day. A man, leaning against a door frame, was staring at his hand as though he had never seen it before. Odd things like that became more commonplace, and the people who lived in the town their entire lives noticed as well. The strangers were approached and asked who they were and where they were from. They would answer without taking their eyes off the object they were focused on. They said they were from a ways off and were traveling to their homeland. That seemed to appease people for a while. Weeks later, when they were still hanging around, people started to get anxious. My parents told us kids that the strangers were down on their luck and hadn't done anything wrong. That's what they said to our faces, but behind closed doors I got the feeling they weren't so optimistic. I went to the bathroom one night and had to pass by my parents' bedroom to get there. I overheard them talking about the strangers and my dad saying he would keep the gun loaded in case they ever came around. It seemed odd that these strangers had never done anything wrong and yet were the subject of such hushed tones, conversations spoken in fear. I remember when our neighbor Mr. Hutchins went missing. He was a nice older man in his 60s or 70s, I think. He always gave out full-sized candy bars on Halloween. He used to be out early every morning tending his animals. We'd see him when we were on our way to school and he'd always wave to us. One morning, he just wasn't there. We didn't think much of it at the time. We thought maybe he was sick or something. In the evening, he wasn't there either. We told our mother about it, but she just said he was probably in town getting groceries or farm supplies. The next morning when we went to school, there was still no Mr. Hutchins. When we told our mother after school, she decided to go visit to see if he'd fallen. When there was no answer at the door and the animals were out roaming, my mother decided to call the sheriff. My mother tried to show us inside when the sheriff's car showed up, but we just went upstairs to Bobby's room and watched out the window. The sheriff knocked and called for Mr. Hutchins, then went inside. He was in there for a long time. We started to think one of Mr. Hutchins' dogs had chewed him up or something. When the sheriff finally came back out, he got into his car and used the radio. The next thing we know, 3 more sheriff's cars show up, and they start going in and out of the house and barn like a swarm of angry bees. We asked our mother about it at supper, and she wasn't too pleased that we had been snooping. My dad was out of town doing his deliveries, but he would have told us to mind our own business and stay out of others' affairs. My mother told us the sheriff didn't know where Mr. Hutchins had gone to, but his truck was still there, so he couldn't have gotten far. They said he might have had a spell and wandered off. They looked for him for 2 days, then suddenly he showed up at his house as if nothing had happened. We were happy he was back, but curious where he gotten to. After he came home, he just sat on his porch and stared at the tree in his front yard. We went over to visit him and asked him where he'd been. He kept staring at the tree like we weren't there. Mr. Hutchins, I said. Yes, he replied, staring at the tree. How are you, sir? I asked. He didn't answer right away. His stare never wavered. Finally, he said, good, we were wondering where you'd gone, sir. Bobby asked. I was. He seemed to struggle with the right word. Away. Well, we're glad you're back, sir. Candace said, do you need any help with your animals? He said as if the word was unfamiliar to him. Yes, sir, taking care of your animals like we've done before, she said. He didn't reply, just stared at the tree. I looked at Bobby and Catherine. They both seemed as shocked as I was that he was ignoring us. We'd always been on good terms with Mr. Hutchins. There were times we would help out around his farm, and with his animals he would reward us with some money or some treats, but he was always grateful for the help. I waved my hand in front of his eyes, and he didn't blink. We shook our heads and walked away. When we got home, we told my mom how he was acting. We told her we thought something was wrong with him, like he was sick. My mom told us to leave him alone, that he'd had a hard time and we shouldn't be pastoring him, but we soon had more to worry about. We played hide and seek all weekend when we weren't doing our J chores. It was the last fun weekend of my childhood. We went to school on Monday and got a nasty shock. One of my classmates and buddies that I hung out with was Mike. When I got to class, Mike was already in his seat staring at the blackboard. Morning, Mike. I said. He didn't move or speak. What's up with you? I said. You stay up too late last night? No, he said, still staring. So what's with the zombie routine? I asked. Are you practicing for Halloween? No, he replied, not blinking. Okay, so you're playing a joke on me. Haha, very funny. I said. You can return to Earth now, zombie. Mike, he didn't move and stopped talking. Whatever, man, I said, and let him play his game all through class. He didn't say a word. Even when the teacher called on him, he just sat there and Stared at the board. She chided him for ignoring her, but then when she came over to his desk and waved her hand in front of his eyes, he didn't blink. Mike, she said. He didn't answer. I haven't seen him move in over an hour, I said to the teacher. She took him to the nurse, mumbling that maybe he'd had a stroke. When the teacher returned, she was alone and very rattled. She made us read for the rest of the period while we heard her out in the hallway discussing Mike's art behavior with another teacher. Mike never came back to class that day. When class ended, I approached her. How's Mike? I asked. She seemed nervous. I'm not sure, she replied. Is he okay? I followed up. I don't know, she said, getting up and walking to the door. If you want to know any more about him, you'll have to ask his parents. She held the door open as I walked through it, then shut it and went back to her desk. I saw her pick up her phone. She didn't look very happy as she talked. I went home confused and concerned for my friend. I asked my mom if I could go over to Mike's house to check on him. She told me to go over and come back in an hour for supper. As I walked down the street towards Mike's, I saw more people standing around staring at nothing. It was like they just paused in the middle of whatever they were doing and found something extremely interesting. It was creepy. When I knocked on Mike's door, his mom answered. Oh, hey, Billy, she said. Mike isn't feeling well right now. I know, I saw him at school today and he was acting weird. I just wanted to check and see if he was okay, I responded. She glanced inside the house. I don't know if you would call it okay or not, she told me. Is he still acting like a zombie? I said, expecting her to laugh. She shot me a horrified look. Maybe you should come in and see for yourself. I stepped inside and she led me back to his room. He was standing there in the middle of the floor looking up at the light fixture. It wasn't even turned on. Hey, buddy, I just came by to see how you're doing, I said. Good, he said, still staring. I was a little worried about the way you were acting at school today, I said. He stood silent. Okay, Mike, whatever game you're playing you win. Now it's time to snap out of it and be normal again. His gay SL slowly slid down from the light and landed on me. Normal, he said slowly. Yeah, normal, you know, like everyone else. He didn't answer, but his stare freaked me out. It was like he was looking at me but not looking at me at the same time. You know what, Mike, I've had it with this stupid game. If you don't quit it, we're not friends anymore. Friends, he said, staring through me. Yes, friends, I said. You and I have been friends for years and you know that. He stood silent and unmoving. Okay, I'm done, I said, walking out of the room. His mom followed me out. Are you really not going to be friends with him anymore, she asked. I was just trying to get him to quit playing, I said, peeking around the corner to see Mike staring at the spot where I had been standing. Did the nurse say anything about what could have happened, I asked. She said it might have been a stroke, but his vital signs say everything's fine. This is too weird, I said. He's acting just like who, she asked as I rushed out the door. Like who, she called after me. I ran to Mr. Hutchins' house and found him sitting on the front porch. He was staring at the tree like the day we came to talk to him. Mr. Hutchins, I said, what happened when you disappeared? He didn't respond. Mr. Hutchins, I called, grabbing him and giving him a bit of a shake. I need to know. His head slumped forward. I jumped back. Mr. Hutchins, I said while slowly approaching him again. I reached for his neck to feel for a pulse. I waited a long time before realizing that there was none. As I pulled my hand away, he grabbed it. I jumped trying to get away, but his grip was too strong. He stared into my eyes. Normal, he said in a raspy voice that I didn't recognize. Then he slumped over again. When he released me, I ran home. Mom, I shouted as I burst through the door. Billy, what is it? She asked. It's Mr. Hutchins, I told her. Has he gone missing again? She asked. No, I think he's dead, I replied. She stopped making supper and turned slowly toward me. Dead? She asked. Yes, I told her. How do you know? She asked. I explained what happened with Mike and how I went to Mr. Hutch's house after I told her what happened there, and she got this far off look. Stay here, she said. Walking out the door, I watched her walk over to Mr. Hutch's house. I saw her look at the body, then I saw her cover her mouth and run home. When she burst through the door, she went straight for the phone and called 911. Within 15 minutes, there were just as many flashing lights at his house as the day he went missing. The sheriff asked me some questions about it. I don't think he believed me about the grabbing and talking part. He said Mr. Hutchins had been dead for hours. When he was done, we finally had supper. None of us talked much except for asking to pass the food. After supper, I went to my room and laid down on my bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what was going on before I Knew it. I had fallen asleep. When I woke, I was surprised that I was still in my clothes from the day before, and it slept on top of my blanket. Usually if I fall asleep like this, my mom comes in and covers me up. She must have been tired last night from all the excitement. I thought. I got up and went to the kitchen. There was no one there and nothing cooking. That in itself was odd. My mom was always the first one up in the morning cooking breakfast. Even if we just had cereal, she was up making coffee for her and my dad. It was eerie walking into a dark kitchen and getting my own cereal. I expected her to show up at any moment, but she never did. Bobby and Catherine stumbled into the room and got their breakfast too. His mom sick or something? Catherine asked. I don't know, maybe she's just upset from the whole Mr. Hutchins thing, I replied. Bobby just sat and munched on his cereal. Half awake, we finished breakfast and got ready for school. Still no mom. I went to my parents' bedroom and peeked inside. My mom and dad were both laying in bed, so I let them sleep. That school day was completely surreal. Half the kids were out sick. I'd never seen anything like it except on the first day of deer season. Even a couple of the teachers just sat there staring like my cad. They didn't talk to us all day. We just sat there reading or talking quietly to each other, hoping that no one would be loud enough to break the teacher out of her stupor. I knew something was wrong. The strangers had done something to make these people into these weird zombies. I wish I had another word for it, because I hadn't seen anyone trying to attack or bite anyone else yet. They just hung around like zombies would before they attack. I just hoped the attack would never come. When we got home from school that day, my mom and dad were still in bed. I went into their room and stood beside the bed. My mom's eyes were open, staring at the wall. Mom, I said, are you okay? Yes, she replied without blinking. Is that okay? I continued. Yes, she said. Have you been in bed all day? I asked. She didn't answer. Are you going to cook supper again? She didn't answer. I waved my hand in front of her face and she didn't blink. Please, Mom, I said, please snap out of it. We need you for the slightest moment. Her eyes met mine and a single teardrop fell from her eye. Then she went back to staring at the wall. I left the room and told Bobby and Catherine that they were still in bed and I didn't think they would be coming out anytime soon. Should we call someone? Catherine asked. Like who? Bobby replied. I don't know, maybe the doctor. She said. Okay, I said, pulling out the phone book and looking up the number for the doctor. I dialed it and waited as it rang and rang. No one's answering. I said, who else can we call? Catherine asked. We used to ask Mr. Hutchin for help when we needed it. Bobby replied. A horrible thought suddenly struck me. You don't think Mom and Dad will end up? I said, unable to finish the sentence. Like Mr. Hutchins? Catherine asked. I nodded. Bobby started to cry. We don't know that'll happen. Mr. Hutchins was old, much older than Mom and Dad. Catherine said. Bobby sniffed a few times and stopped crying. So what do we do now? He asked. Let's make some sandwiches for us and for Mom and Dad. I said, we can take them in and see if they're hungry. We did exactly that, but neither of them responded. They just remained in bed staring at the walls. The three of us ate our sandwiches and put ourselves to bed. We agreed to call the doctor again in the morning, and if he didn't answer, we'd call the sheriff. None of us went straight to sleep that night. We were too worried about Mom and Dad. I was also worried about Mike. This whole thing seemed like it was out of a late-night movie. I couldn't imagine it being real. I kept trying to pinch myself to wake up from this bad dream. Before I knew it, I could hear my brother and sisters breathing, settling into the rhythm of sleep. I smiled for the first time in a while, listening to them in a peaceful slumber. As I listened, I heard another sound, floorboards creaking. I froze to the thought of a burglar breaking in and Dad not being able to do anything about it. The steps came closer. I huddled under my blanket for protection. The door creaked open. I snuck a glance and felt immediate relief. It was Mom. She was still dressed in her nightgown. She moved slowly to Catherine's bed and lifted her up. She turned and carried her out of the room. Then my dad came in and carried Bobby out. I got up and followed. Mom, Dad, I said, where are you taking them? My mom had the door open and was walking outside. My dad stopped and looked at me. Don't worry, he said, we'll come back for you. Then they walked out into the cool night. My blood froze. I didn't know where they were going, but I knew I didn't want to go there. I threw my shoes on and stepped outside. As I flew down the stairs, I saw a strange light at the end of our driveway. There were two silhouettes in it, and they were heading back toward the house. I squinted against the light, trying to see if it was my parents or whatever those things were that looked like my parents. As the figures grew closer, I could see they were Empty-handed, I stood in the middle of our yard frozen with fear. I didn't know what to do. If I went back inside, they would find me and take me to be turned into a zombie too. I couldn't run to Mr. Hutchins's house. Running to town would leave me wide open to be chased down. I turned around and round in a panic looking for options. The barn was an option, but not a good one. There weren't many hiding places there. Then it hit me. Hiding places. Where was my best hiding place? I ran into the cornfield. It was nearly harvest time, and the corn was as tall as it was going to get. It was dark, and would be even darker in the rows of corn. The only light came from the house, and whatever was at the end of our driveway. I threw myself into the forest of green stalks and ran part way in. I stopped and realized what I'd done. I had run in a straight line, making myself an easy talk target. I refocused on my usual hide-and-seek strategy. One started from where I was, counted a certain number of rows up and a certain number over. I was careful to move slowly and disturb the cornstalks as little as possible. I duck-walked, staying as low to the ground as possible and moving as quietly as I could. I was near where I wanted to hide when something in my head told me to stop where I was. It was almost totally dark. The lights from the house and that thing cast strange shadows at the base of the corn. I could barely see a few feet in front of me. I resisted the urge to sit down and instead stayed in my crouched position on my toes so I could be ready to bolt at a moment's notice. I settled into my spot and focused on slowing my breathing. My adrenaline fought against me, telling me to run and never stop running. I pushed those thoughts aside and tried to be as silent as possible. The air was still. There was no wind and nothing moved. I became hypersensitive to the sounds I was making. Each time I inhaled and exhaled, it sounded like a steam engine chugging to get up a hill. Any movement I made, I heard the creak of the sole of my sneakers. I could even hear my neck muscles as I turned slowly, searching for any pursuers. It was like my body was conspiring against me, bound and determined to get caught somehow. Over all the racket I was making, I heard a sound. I closed my eyes and focused on listening. For a long moment there was nothing. I mean nothing. Not even the nightly crickets were singing. And then I heard it. Someone was in the cornfield. They were moving slowly. I tried to tell if it was one or many. At first I couldn't, but then I heard another sound coming from behind me. They were still a little ways off. I thought they had just entered the cornfield. I painted a mental picture of how close they were. My mental map showed me one coming from the direction of the house and one from the driveway. As I heard them getting closer, I had to fight to stay still. My mind was screaming at me to run. I knew from so many hide-and-seek sessions that that was the worst thing to do. I kept my eyes closed and waited for them to pass me. By then I would sneak out in the other direction. That plan seemed to appease my nerves enough to stop yelling. I heard one of them approaching. They were coming right at me. I could see the stalks beside me moving, but I stayed still. 2 rows before one of my pursuers would have literally run me over. They stopped. It seemed like there was a moment of indecision, and then they started off again in a different direction. I wanted to breathe a sigh of relief, but the other one was still approaching. They were slowly walking up the road beside the one I was in. They walked right beside me and stopped. I recognized my dad's boots. I just didn't know what was wearing them now. He turned towards me. I knew I was done. There was nowhere I could run that he wouldn't catch me. I kept my eyes closed, refusing to move, even to look up at the man I called father, or what he had become. He stood there unmoving for what seemed like an eternity. Self-preservation was all that kept me from surrendering. I had seen these empty shells of people I used to love, and I wanted to survive, to pass on the memories of who they were before he turned and took a step away from me. Then another. I wanted to jump for joy. I wanted to run as I'd never run before, but mostly I wanted to be careful. I remembered the times playing hide and seek when the seeker pretended to walk away only to turn around and lunge at me. I held my breath as his footsteps continued away from me. I counted to 100 before I would allow myself to move. As I started to sneak away, I saw an ear of corn lying on the ground. I picked it up and threw it as hard as I could in the opposite direction of my escape route. When it landed, I heard both of my pursuers converge on it. I ran quickly and quietly away from them. Before I knew it, I was at the edge of the cornfield near the road. I peeked out and saw the light at the end of my driveway. It didn't look like headlights from a vehicle. It was just a bright light hovering a few feet off the ground. It was so bright that I couldn't tell what it was attached to, or if it was attached to anything at this point. I didn't know what I believed anymore. I just knew someone or something had taken the people I love and turned them into zombies. No, zombies wasn't right. It was more like robots. They would just stare at whatever until needed. Then they would be called into action, like my mom and dad. I turned away from the light and ran. It wasn't long until I heard a strange sound. It was like a mechanical scream. It chilled my bones to hear it. It seemed to be coming from behind me. The light was getting brighter too. I knew it was following me. My dad dashed out of the cornfield and tried to grab me, but I was already out of his reach. I could hear him running behind me when my mom came around the corner, and I nearly ran into her. I have no idea how I avoided her open arms. Maybe somewhere along the line there was some football player genes in me, but I did a stiff arm spin move that would make any running back proud. I ran like my life depended on it, which it did. My legs were burning. My lungs were on fire. I had a stitch in my side, and yet I kept running. My parents and the light chasing right behind me, just waiting for me to trip or make some mistake. I was almost in town when a light shone in front of me. It also hovered just off the ground. I was trapped with nowhere left to go. I stopped. It wasn't more than a heartbeat until my dad got a hold of me. My mom was right behind him. They each grabbed an arm and turned me around to head back towards the driveway light. At least they were walking, and I could take a breather before being turned into a zombie robot. The light behind us got brighter, and I heard a strange sound from that direction. They sounded somewhat familiar, though as the light got closer, suddenly my dad started convulsing. He fell to the ground, followed shortly by my mom. Someone ran up and grabbed me. "Come on, kid," a large man said. "Let's get you out of here." I turned from my now unconscious parents to the man. He was in the soldier's uniform form and holding a taser. He dropped it and ran with me halfway over his shoulder toward the other light. The closer we got, I turned to see it was a helicopter. It touched down just long enough for us to get on. Then it took off again. I watched as we flew over my parents laying there, looking very dead. Could the shock bring them out of it? I said hopefully. "Sorry, kid, it doesn't work that way," he said. "Once they've been turned, there's no going back." A tear slid down my cheek as I watched my parents disappear into the distance. I looked back at the house I'd lived my entire life, and hopelessness overwhelmed me. For a fleeting moment, I felt like I would have been better off with them. At least we would all be together as a family. My eyes caught a long line of lights driving into town. "What's that?" I said, pointing at the lights. "Containment," he said. "What does that mean?" "It means we can't let anyone escape who's been infected." "Infected?" I questioned. He shrugged. "I don't have a better word for it." I thought for a moment. "Am I infected?" I asked. He looked at me. "Are you talking?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Are you staring mindlessly at inanimate objects?" he asked. "No," I answered. "You're not infected," he told me. I slumped back in the seat and closed my eyes, happy to be alive, but incredibly sad for those I'd lost. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke, we were on a military base. Soldiers were hustling around like ants on an until a man in a suit came over to the helicopter and took me inside. What happened next is a long story that I might tell someday. Suffice it to say for now that after a long time I was taken to a foster family who raised me as their own. The town I used to live in ceased to exist. I never saw a single soul from there ever again. I was told I was the only one that was rescued that night before. I don't want to get into that right now. I've tried going back, but it's surrounded by a fence with no trespassing government property signs posted every 20 feet. It surrounds the entire town. I can see my old house from the fence, but no matter what I do, they won't let me back in. I have to wonder if they don't have the people in there standing around staring at nothing, waiting to die. I've searched the internet for any traces of the town. There aren't any. It's like every piece of history, every shred of proof that the town ever existed has been erased. I've talked to others who've heard of similar experiences. The words paranormal, possession, and alien come up the most for possible explanations, but I wonder if it isn't something deeper than that, if it isn't something so sinister that explanations could be dangerous. Maybe it's for the best. Maybe I should just drop the whole thing and move on with my life. I just can't help but wonder what really went on. It's a mystery I need to unravel for Mom, Dad, Bobby, Catherine, Mike, Mr. Hutchins, and everyone else whose life was erased first by whoever or whatever did this to them, and then by those who want to cover it up. I posted this to let Everyone know about the people who used to be my friend's family and neighbors. I don't want their memories to be in vain, but mostly I don't want to allow others to fall into the same trap. If you see someone staring at nothing in particular and they refuse to speak, get away from them as soon as you can. They aren't as lost and helpless as you may think. How many other tiny towns in the middle of nowhere have suffered the same fate? I wonder. It was one of those nights the fog hovered in the air like a curtain waiting to rise on a show. I would never forget being called into work early on. 3 hours of sleep was bad enough. Driving through the fog that was so thick you can feel it holding back the car makes for an interesting morning. Maybe listening to Metallica's All Night Long at 3 a.m. wasn't the best choice. It started with the floating legs. As I drove, I saw a pair of blue jeans standing along the side of the road. Just the legs. It was like someone had stood half a mannequin beside the road to freak people out. As I came closer, I could see there was a black hoodie on top of them in a vaguely human form. The head turned toward me, but I could see nothing inside the hood. The chill went up my spine as my foot went down on the accelerator. I was so freaked out that I never saw the deer running straight toward me. It wasn't until it was right beside my car that I noticed it. It startled me so badly that I swerved to miss it and ended up on a side road I'd never driven on or even seen before. I hadn't gone far before I calmed down and realized I'd made a wrong turn. I stopped in front of a road sign that mesmerized me. It had once been a standard deer crossing sign, the one with a silhouetted buck leaping into the air. However, this one had been modified by a talented artist. The painted additions made the deer enormous, bigger than a moose. It also had a mouthful of shark-like teeth, a spiked tail, and glowing red eyes. The sight of this fanciful creature should have made me laugh, but after the I'd already had it chilled me to the bone. I immediately did a 3-point turn and floored it. I made it maybe 100 yards. My front tire, which wasn't in the greatest shape, gave into the stress and had a catastrophic blowout. This plus my speed sent me kenning off the road and into a deep ravine. At least that's where I woke up, in a deep ravine. I willed my blurry eyes to clear and was immediately sorry. I had every window was shattered, tree limbs shot this way and that all through the car's interior. It looked like the love child of an ant and a Buick. My seat belt held me fast and the deflated airbag laid out before me like a miniature blanket of snow. I leaned forward and was twice rewarded. The first by pain. My chest and arms felt like they were on fire. The second was the realization that I wasn't on the ground. The car creaked and groaned when I moved. It stood straight up, resting precariously on a large tree limb. I couldn't see how far it was to the bottom because of the same fog that got me into this predicament. Okay, this is bad. I can't even hope for help. No one would ever see me down here. To keep me calm, I did some physical assessments, starting at the feet. Toes wiggle, that's good. Right leg bends, left leg. Oh my god, I'm going to call, feeling like I've been stabbed by 1,000 knives. Bad. I leaned forward just enough to see my leg. My pants were covered in blood. I tried to reach the wound, but stopped when the branch made a cracking sound. Okay, we'll come back to that. Moving on, my lower abdomen and seems okay. My ribs feel like they're the main course at a barbecue, and my arms shoot daggers every time I try to move them. The most disturbing part of all of this is the lack of blood on my shirt. Okay, and assessment: possible broken leg, possible broken ribs, possible internal bleeding. Car destroyed, hanging precariously in a tree that could give out and send me falling to my death at any minute. Low possibility of rescue due to the early morning hour fog and being out of sight of the road, so essentially I'm dead. The worst part of all this was being alone with my thoughts, knowing that death was on its way and there was nothing I could do about it. All these thoughts disappeared as a slight breeze made the hair on my neck stand on end, and I heard a low rumble. I slowly turned to face the noise and wondered if I was hallucinating. I saw two huge red orbs coming steadily towards me out of the fog. As they approached, I could see they were attached to a monstrosity. The creature stopped right beside the car. The artist on the sign didn't do it justice. My breathing became rapid and shallow as my heart jackhammered in my chest. A warm liquid ran down my leg that had nothing to do with the car. Its glowing red eyes were the size of basketballs. Its teeth looked like they came straight out of the shark from Jaws. Its claws were as long as hunting knives. I stifled a scream as my injuries were forgotten. The huge red eyes were so close I could feel the warmth coming off of them. It stared at me. Don't move, don't Breathe, don't think it ripped the door off the car and inhaled as it sniffed me. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, damn, the roof collapsed from the weight and missed crushing my head by mere inches. I nearly lost consciousness from the agonizing pain as I hung upside from my seat belt strapped across my broken ribs. The car began to move, metal protested as it was dragged through the woods. Oh no. It's taking me back to its cave. I tried to reach the seat bell release, but the pain was too great. I was being dragged helplessly to my death for what seemed like an eternity. This ride from hell taught me the meaning of pain. Every bump in jostle was a new lesson. The metal screeched in protest as the car finally stopped. The creature sniffed me again. Go ahead, eat me, I screamed. I hope I give you indigestion. The red orb stared at me as if sizing me up to see if it would be enough trouble to rip me out of the car. In desperation, I used the only thing I had available to me. I reached up painfully and pressed the horn. The creature jumped and screamed a horribly loud cry that defied description. The last thing I remember seeing was it running off into the trees as my mind led me into blissful unconsciousness. Beep, beep, beep. All right, I'm up already. I reached for my alarm clock, but it wasn't there. In fact, my bedroom wasn't there either. I woke to incessant beeps pounding my aching head. My eyes settled on the man in uniform standing at the foot of my bed staring at me. Good morning, he said. Good morning, I rasped back. My name, Sheriff Seacrest. I realized this isn't the best time, but I need to ask you a few questions about your accident. Okay, I replied. From the skid marks on the road, I figured you were doing at least 80 when your tire blew. Any reason you were going that fast, he asked. And I under arrest? I questioned. The sheriff studied me for a moment. No, you're not under arrest. I'm just trying to figure out what happened. I was scared, I said, barely above a whisper. Scared of what? Of whatever was in the fog, I continued. So what was in the fog? He asked. I laid quiet for a long time. I wrestled with the implications of telling someone else what I saw, but I wasn't even sure myself. My imagination. I told him. The sheriff seemed a bit disappointed. So how did your car get out of the tree? Dragged a 100 yards and set on the side of a road. I don't know, Sheriff. I wish I had the answers for you, but I blacked out when I landed in that tree and woke up here, I explained to him. And that's all you remember? He questioned. Yes, sir, I replied. Was there any wildlife around? What do you mean, wildlife? I asked back. Oh, you know, squirrels, foxes, deer, he said, emphasizing the last word. Nothing that I saw. As I said, I blacked out. He closed his notebook. Thank you for your help. I hope you recover soon. I hope so too. The sheriff started for the door, stopped, turned back, and looked into my eyes as if he desperately wanted to say something. He then faltered and said, you're very lucky to be alive, he stated. I told him I know every small town has their fair share of local legends. They don't really travel past the borders of the town, and most certainly never end up on the internet. Ironic, considering I'm writing this now, but the locals can tell them by heart. I've heard a lot of them in my time as a truck driver, but none of them actually held any truth to them except for one, the story of the ghoul. I heard it when I was traveling through South Dakota. I had stopped driving for the night and was just too damn tired, and it was so humid out that my windshield started to fog up. I'd ended up in some tiny town called Auguay, about an hour from Custer and 3 hours from where I needed to drop my shipment. When I say it was tiny, I mean it. There were about 15 buildings total, most of them houses. The remainder were a restaurant with a bar attached, one church, and a gas station. I didn't exactly trust this restaurant's quality, but I was starving, so I figured that I'd at least sit at the bar and order some sliders if they had them. The door jingled as I walked in, and a mostly empty dining room greeted me. There were 3 total people in the building. From what I saw, there was the bartender, a bald, bearded man, who immediately gave me a quizzical look. The only other person at the bar was a young woman who was drinking a label as beer, and didn't even turn her head to look at me when I sat down. I was clearly the outlier here. I wasn't exactly welcome, and I felt it. Still, I picked up a menu and tapped the beer I wanted. When I took my first sip, she finally spoke. I haven't seen you before. Her voice was equal parts rough and soothing. I was startled, but I pride myself on being polite, so I turned to face her and tried to make small talk. I'm not from around here, I'm just passing through. I figured, what brings you in here? The appetite of a horse, that's what I've been on the road for 11 hours. She giggled. She wasn't battle looking, but wasn't exactly my type either, so I hoped she wouldn't confuse my jokes. Is flirting your funny, she said. I turned away for a moment to signal for another beer and looked back. At her, I have my moments. At least she looked at the bartender as he passed me. My second pour, and waited for him to take my order before she signaled to him Rico. Should we do it? He grunted and walked into the kitchen. She seemed to take that as a yes and excitedly looked at me. We've got a tradition around here. Everyone who drinks at the bar has to tell story. It's nothing crazy, but we only have 23 people living here, so we're always itching to hear something new. I'm not a very interesting person, all things considered. You would think I had some crazy stories after traveling around the country, but I really never left the road long enough to see stuff like that. Still, I wanted to put on a good show, so I decided to tell them a story about the first time I saw the ocean. As I munched on my onion rings, I tried to make it as fantastical as possible and admittedly embellished the details of it. I'd never actually seen a killer whale before, but they didn't need to know that. By the looks of it, the woman was captivated with the story and sat there the whole time with her chin in her hands and her bright eyes trained on mine. I finished spinning my tale and turned back to face the bar, placing a 20 on the counter. Is a tip. I was about to say goodbye when the woman halted me with a slight smirk on her face. You got a good speaking voice. Thanks for telling us your story. I want to tell you one too. I was dead tired, but my manners prevented me from refusing, so I smiled and signaled to her to continue. It's the same one I tell everyone who comes through here because it's the one that sticks with you the longest. I nearly jumped out of my chair when the bartender finally spoke. It wasn't even directed at me, but it caught me off guard. The one about the ghoul. Again, yes sir, unless you got a better idea. He remained silent. She looked at me and began her story. The ghoul was a local ghost story about something that haunted people who passed through the town. It was a long, pale figure that would only speak one word at a time. It would start haunting someone once they heard its story, and it wouldn't stop until they were dead. I sat there, relatively entertained, as she described the ways that the ghoul would make people go missing, but I obviously wasn't buying it. But you want to know how you can be sure that the ghoul is after you? How's that? I asked. It makes you see stuff, man, stuff that isn't really there. It'll make you see it, feel like it's real. To me, the story just sounded like a bad drug trip or an excuse to get me to stay in town. I was blinking in and out of consciousness when she finally finished, and I decided I'd head back to the motel before she decided story time would continue. Well, I'm going to call it a night. You folks have a good one. She stopped smiling and just blankly stared at me. I got up and walked towards the door, pushing it open with my foot. Hey, one question before you go. I sighed and turned around. I just wanted to go to bed. Yeah, what's up? I asked. You can see us, right? She asked. I wasn't sure if I'd heard her wrong, but what I'd heard was a weird-ass question indeed. Need? Who was us? Her and the bartender, of course. I could see them. They were right there. She was starting to creep me out. Yes. She took a sip of her drink and looked at the bartender before turning back towards me. Well, good night, she said. My brow furrowed, and I walked out the door. Whatever was going on with that woman, I wanted no part of it. She'd been pretty nice up to that point too. I have no idea where all of that suddenly came from. I wasn't exactly in the mood to ponder it further, so I began walking down the street towards the motel. As I walked, I thought about the story she told me. Why was that the story she told to people who passed through town? Some sort of scare you into staying tactic, like, I guessed. Maybe. I wasn't sure. I unlocked the door to my room, and after brushing my teeth, tucked in for the night, I woke up to a knock at the door. I rubbed my eyes and groaned. I didn't feel well rested at all. I rolled over and grabbed my phone off the bedside table, squinting as the bright light hit my eyes. It was 3 in the morning. What someone could want at this hour, I had no idea, but I wasn't about to entertain it, and I put my phone back and shut my eyes, hoping that whoever was there would go away. The second knock jolted out whatever grogginess I had left in my system. It was much louder than the last one, like someone who slapped the palm of their hand onto the door. I jumped out of the bed and laid on the floor, hoping that they wouldn't try the handle. I had to get to the door and lay against it. Whatever unsavory character was trying to open it was still pounding, and I didn't have the confidence that the shitty motel door would hold. I crawled on my hands and knees to the other side of the room, and as my bare back pressed against the cool scratched wood, the pounding suddenly stopped. I was horrified that I would hear the handle turn or feel the door give out from behind me after a kick, but none of that happened. Instead, I hear shuffling from behind the door, which gave way to a Single word breaking the silence, open. It was no louder than a whisper, but in the deafening silence I heard it clearly. My heart sank, and I tried to process what I just heard. It didn't sound like anyone I knew, obviously, but it also didn't really sound either male or female. I tried my best not to move, and held my breath. Please open. Every hushed word pumped a dose of adrenaline directly into my system. Whoever was out there was either sincerely in need of help or trying to coax me to open the door so they could do God knows what. I had to stay put. If I went to grab my phone, I was afraid that the door would fly open and I'd have to face whoever it was. I sat there for what felt like hours. As I was starting to fall asleep again, much to my dismay, I heard footsteps walking away from the door. I inched away from the door as they got quieter and was almost at the bedside table when I looked up. The bathroom door, which was open before I went to bed, was now closed. I froze, unsure of what to do. When the pounding started from the other side of the door, I shut up, grabbed my phone and keys, and sprinted towards the bedroom door. As I flung the door open, I heard heavy footsteps not far behind me, along with a familiar voice. No, it kept repeating it so calmly. Following behind me, I bolted down the stairs, running through the parking lot towards my truck. As I jumped into the driver's seat, I felt something hit the door. I didn't want to turn, I didn't want to look, but I did. Standing outside of my door was a twisted face. The eyes were the size of baseballs and were peeled open, fixed directly on me. The mouth hung open as if the jaw couldn't close. It didn't have a nose or ears or any other features on its face. We sat looking at each other for what was most likely seconds, but may as well have been easy neons, without moving its gaping mouth. It spoke. See me. By this point I pieced together what was happening and jammed the keys into the ignition. I floored it onto the road and didn't breathe until the town was nothing but a faint light in the distance. I was exhausted and could barely keep my eyes open. I yawned and slapped myself on the cheek in an attempt to wake myself up, but could feel myself drifting off. But I was feeling something else too, a sense of dread right in the pit of my stomach, taking my eyes off of the road. I cautiously turned my head to the left. It was still there. Its head was directly centered in my window, now smiling at me. I swallowed the urge to scream and looked back at the road. It couldn't get in and couldn't affect me if I didn't look at it, but what it could do was talk in its low, haunting voice, punctuated with guttural growling. You see me. It repeated that for hours. I'd almost forgotten what silence was like by the time the sun rose. As the dawn broke and the light began to fill my eyes once again, it went quiet, and only the sound of my tires traversing the bumpy road remained. I looked to the left and saw trees through my window. Nothing was blocking it anymore. I arrived in Dupree shortly after and didn't even help the factory workers unload the shipment. I just sat in the driver's seat smoking a cigarette and thinking to myself when someone knocked on my window. I nearly had a heart attack. It was the factory supervisor who I called to sign off on the product. You're doing okay, couple of my guys said. You didn't look so hot. I cleared my throat and put my cigarette out in the ashtray. I looked over at him and managed to smile. Yeah, I'm all right. Long night though, barely got any sleep. Had to leave at 3 a.m. 3 in the morning. How far away were you that you just now got here? I opened the door and stepped out onto the gravel, holding my clipboard. It felt good to make small talk after what I'd been through. I was up in Auguay, odd little town. For sure, Auguay, I've never heard of it. I looked at him, expecting him to be kidding me. His brow was furrowed, and he looked concerned for me. If anything, I pulled out my phone and showed him my delivery tracking app, which had marked where I'd stopped for the night. It's right about here. He looked away from the phone and at me with serious concern on his face now. He then said, I've been hunting out there. There's nothing there but woods 4 miles. Okay, so I'm a male and I'm 48. I recently went to help out my mother with cleaning out her house. It took weeks. She was a hoarder, and just so you understand what I mean, she had around 6 different drawers full of unused soap bars, and when I asked why she had so many, her only answer was just in case I needed them. I'm her only remaining family, as I was an only child. My father, her husband, passed away from cancer at a young age, and all her siblings, our relatives, are either dead or not in our country, so I officially made the choice a few months ago to put her into a nursing home. Anyways, the final room I had to clear out was the attic, and when I tell you there were piles upon piles of boxes just filled with books, it took me around 5 hours to sort through it all, and 95 of those books just went into a bag for donations, so when I got to the final box, it felt like a miracle from God to say the least. I was honestly prepared to just toss the whole box into the donations bag, but I'm glad I didn't. I just regret it a ton. Most days I found this old tattered notebook. It felt like if I touched it, it was going to disintegrate. I cleared off all the dust, assuming to find one of those picture memory books or something, but instead I found a journal. The handwriting was messy and absolutely didn't belong to either my mother nor my father. I just assumed my mom picked it up at one of those church sales she loved going to, but after reading a couple of pages, I wasn't so sure. This book has haunted my nightmares. Anytime I close my eyes, I just visualize the things I've read within that damn notebook, and despite my utter fear of it, let it be D to make this post and not cite some of the pages, so here it goes. The 26th of the 6th, 1978. I don't understand why it's so morally wrong to kill someone. People just don't understand the thrill of it. It's the same as taking a drug. The first dose is the best thing imaginable, then the second or the third or any time after that can't live up to that first hit. So many people like to say don't knock it till you try it, so why are people immediately want to shame murderers? I have a theory that if everyone just tries it once, they'll understand the righteousness of it. Having someone under your hands watching as their face contorts to shock, to fear, to anger, to desperation, and finally to despair, seeing the life drain from their eyes, letting you be the last face they see as you crush their windpipes, a small gurgle that reaches up from the back of their throat as they attempt for their final breath. The next entry was at 3rd of the 7th, 1978. I still remember my first kill like it was yesterday. It wasn't accident, sure, but it was still just as incredible as if I'd intended to do it. I was 10 and my mom had just called me in to watch over the baby as she went to go pee. I knew I didn't have a choice. Being asked to do something is never a choice, you're already expected to do it. So I agreed. I sat on the stool she was on originally and watched as the babbling ball of flesh splashed in the water. That thing hated me. Any time it looked at me, it would cry as if it knew what I was. This time was no different. The second it noticed its sweet mommy was gone, it screamed at the top of its lungs, wailing like a banshee. I swear it's like it wanted to destroy my eardrums. I decided in order to make it stop, I grabbed its little moldable head and shoved it under the water. I'd always been told staying underwater for too long was a bad thing, but I was never taught why its screams turned into bubbles and all was quiet till the bubbles stopped. Then a new scream replaced it. One of my mother. I removed my hand as she screamed at me, asking what I'd done. I watched as she took the rag doll of flesh out of the bathtub and try and get some life back into it. I knew I'd up. I immediately brought out the crocodile tear, explaining between sobs that it was an accident, that he actually put his head under and I was only trying to bring it back up. But God, that feeling I had as I watched its body go limp was one I was never going to forget. That is just 2 of the passages from that notebook. I'll spare you the rest as they were some of the more tamer entries. I have no clue what I'm going to do with this notebook, if I just throw it away, donate it, and let some poor other human read the horror stories between those pages. If I keep it and try to forget about it, handing it into the police would be useless due to how long ago it was. My main thought right now is to burn it, but I'm still not sure what to do right now. The book just sits on my nightstand like some kind of taunt. No matter where I put it in my house, it just feels like it's laughing at me because I'm now the unlucky owner of those gruesome pages. This primarily happened to my mom, but this has badly affected me mentally. With worry, she wanted me to post this just to give people a heads up that you can encounter creeps literally anywhere. This happened a few years ago and we still don't actually know what happened with Jeremy in the end. I'm a 19-year-old female who's studying in a university in England, entering my 2nd year. Last month, we decided to stay in my university town the day before I was due to move into my student accommodation so I could get there early and move my stuff in, and that would give me the rest of the day to relax before we started Fresher Week. The night before MOV moving day, my mother and I stayed in a hotel located in my university town. We were greeted by a very friendly man called Jeremy. Jeremy was very attentive and showed us to our room and stayed around 10 minutes telling us the history of the hotel and repeatedly asked us if we needed help unpacking and stuff, which we kindly rejected. It was a Friday, so my Mother and I went around the town and had a few drinks, nothing too heavy, as fresher week started the next day, so I wanted to be fresh for the Saturday night before going out. Jeremy explained that he never works weekends, so he told us to have a good night and wished me luck with the rest of my university journey. He gave me a hug and gave my mother a hug and also a slight kiss, while moving his hand down towards her ass, which she found weird but brushed it off as nothing. My mother is 37 but look young for her age, and Jeremy is easily in his 40s, so we just thought Jeremy may have fancied his chances with her moving on. My mom and I have a great night around the town, and we watch a couple of live bands and have a few wines, so we are a little on the tipsy side. We get back to the hotel and the bar is still open, so we decide to have a nightcap. Whilst we're having a drink in the bar, Jeremy emerges from a back room and spots us. He makes a couple of jokes. Jeremy then proceeds to watch a video on his phone of a woman screaming at the top of her lungs as if she was being murdered. The screaming was blood-curdling and made my mom and Dee very unsettled, and also another couple in the bar looked a bit concerned as well. The video went on for 3 to 4 minutes before Jeremy left and went into the back. When we make our way to bed, my mom has taken her shoes off after they've become painful after dancing in the bars earlier. Jeremy emerges from the back room and puts his arm around my mom and says, "Oh, let me help you to your room, honey, you must be wasted after drinking all of that." My mom isn't actually that drunk and insists she's fine, but Jeremy persists and basically follows us to our room. He proceeds to come in, but I bid him good night and close the door pretty much in his face before locking it. The next morning we are up early and make our way down for breakfast. The young girl working takes our breakfast order, only for Jeremy to bring them out, insisting the eggs cooked to perfection, although he claimed he never worked weekends. My mom and I are weirded out by Jeremy at this stage and check out straight after breakfast. Jeremy sees us out and says these exact words, "I'll be seeing you very soon, Christine." That was my mother's name anyway. At the time it doesn't strike us as unusual, and my mom drives us to my new home and helps me unpacking stuff. She helps me to unpack and then leaves in the early afternoon, as she had worked that evening in our local bar. The rest of the day goes by without much going on, but that night I'm out drinking with my housemates and I get a call from my mom saying that Jeremy had just come into the bar where she works. This is no coincidence, as when we were having our nightcap, Jeremy would have heard us talking about the bar where my mom works, and he also had our address, which needed to be provided at the hotel for whatever reason. He had also said to my mom when she was pouring his pint that she should go around to his friend's house after her shift, which was just around the corner. This call really scared the out of me. About half an hour later my mom called me and said that Jeremy had left the bar after she rejected his offer to go to his friend's house later, but Jeremy had said he'd be back for her later. This was really worrying, and I told her to make sure a customer was with her, as she was locking up on her own that evening. After this call I felt sick and did not join my friends in going to the nightclubs. In the meantime I called my dad, who no longer speaks to my mom. They aren't on bad terms, they just chose not to keep in contact with each other after they split a few years ago. My dad is a club bouncer, but he wasn't on duty that night, but I called him and begged him to just drive down there and make sure everything was okay. My dad clearly knew by my shaky voice that I was panicked, scared, and helpless. 1 a.m. rolled around and I didn't get a response from either my mom or my dad's phone. I was worried, sick, and hoped that Jeremy hadn't been waiting around a corner and done something to my mom when she was locking up at 1:30 a.m. My mom finally ranged me in hysterics, as she had been locking up. Jeremy had pulled up in a car with 3 other men and shouted at her to get in the car for a ride. My mom declined his advances and he got out of the car and approached her. He told her that he won't tell her again. He said that she had been flirting and teasing him ever since she checked into the hotel the previous night. She told Jeremy that that was complete and she wasn't at all into him. As Jeremy got closer to her, she could smell heavy liquor. As Jeremy went to grab my mom, my dad pulls up behind the car and beeps his horn. This causes Jeremy to go back to the car and climb in the back, and he tells my mom that he knows where she lives and that he'll be waiting. The car screeches off. My dad then gets out of his car and tells my mom that I told him to check on her. Scared to go home alone, she asked my dad to drop her off at my grandmother's, as she didn't want to be alone. After that night we never saw Jeremy again, but my mom did make a report to the police about him and gave them a full account of what happened, but she hasn't heard back from them. I'm just So relieved my dad turned up to the pub when he did, as Jeremy would have easily been able to get my mom into that car, and she's only very small in stature. She's 52 and 120 pounds. I just hoped that scumbag got what was coming to him and is behind bars. My mom has been pretty badly affected by this and is only now comfortable being alone in her house. So Jeremy, I hope you rot in hell and let's never ever meet again. So this happened in 2011, so the exact dialogue may have escaped my memory a bit, but the situation is something I'll never forget. Also, AIM was still pretty active during this time, and so was video chatting. Think tiny chat. This is important for later. I was on an online dating site and was talking to this guy. I was 31 at the time, he was 28. We talked for about 6 weeks before I gave him my phone number, and we took it offline to calling SL texting for another couple of weeks. 2 months after our initial chat, we were texting, and he told me he was out having a few beers at a bar near my house. He asked what I was doing and asked if I wanted to come out, but I had a very long day at work and didn't feel like going to a bar. I'm also not a big drinker. I invited him over to my place after he finished at the bar, and he accepted. I know it was a mistake now. I figured it would be okay since I do keep fire orbs for protection, and I do know how to defend myself if needed. I also had a webcam. I took a shower so I wouldn't smell like a water buffalo on a hot day. I put on some makeup and got dressed to wait. He then called and said he was outside of my house. I clicked record on my computer's webcam program and turned off my monitor and went to let him in. It's around 10 p.m. and he comes in and we go back to my bedroom. Because my living room was being remodeled, we're sitting on the bed chatting for about an hour talking about everything under the sun. The conversation flowed. He was very handsome and so easy to be comfortable with. We got on the subject of firearms and I showed him mine. About 15 minutes later, he asks for some water, so I go to the kitchen to get him a bottle. When I came back, he said he got a phone call and had to leave. After he left, I looked on my nightstand where I put the firearm down after showing him, and I noticed that it was gone. I looked everywhere for it, thinking I'd put it down somewhere else. Nowhere. I then played back the recording from my webcam program, and sure enough, it shows him grabbing it and putting it in his hoodie. I was terrified at that point. He knew where I lived. He had my firearm, and he left his phone on my bed. Right then his phone rings and I answer it. I come to find out he's married. His wife was calling him, wondering where he was. I told her everything, and including the fact that he stole my firearm, and I had video evidence and was calling the police on him. Next thing I know, he's banging on my door, my firearm in his hand, asking me for his phone. The conversation went something like this: I need my phone, give it to me. I replied, not opening the door, but yelling through the window, take the clip out of my firearm, empty the chamber, throw the clip into the bushes, the one in the chamber across the road, and put it on the ground. No, give me my phone, he demanded. I'm on the phone with your wife at the moment, and I have you on video stealing from me. I put his wife on speakerphone. She let out a whole bunch of expletives. He gave off the shocked Pikachu face. He runs and gets in his car, then comes back. I threw your gun in the ditch, he told me. At this point I make him empty his pockets, take his pants off, take his hoodie off, and show me that he doesn't have my firearm on him. All the while his wife is on the phone. I go outside and get in his car in the driver's seat and tell him to take me to where he threw my firearm. He proceeds to tell me that I don't know how hard it is for him, being a felon, not being allowed to own a firearm ever because of a mistake he made. The mistake, you ask? Domestic violence involving a firearm. We get up the road. He tells me the firearm is there in the ditch. Then I realize the situation I'm in. I can get out of the car and go get it, leaving him to do whatever to me if he chooses. He was 6 feet 4 inches, 225 pounds, me 5 feet 3 inches, 135, or I could choose to make him go get it, taking a chance of him seriously hurting me. I took that chance since I was on the phone with his wife and my phone with 911. He retrieves my firearm, brings it back to the car, and I drive back to my house and wait on the police. I get out of the car and he gets in the driver's seat. I'm still on the phone with the police. I walk around the back of his car to get his license plate number, and he just puts his car in reverse, hits me, and then takes off. They found him later that evening. He still had the clip and the one in the chamber in his pocket, but now he's enjoying time in prison. I'm so glad I never have to meet this person again. So today, as I was going for a coffee, I decided to check out a new cafe that Just opened as I go near the door. I'm surprised and happy to see an ex-girlfriend of mine from when I was a kid. We stared each other for a second, and then I see she mumbles something and then comes towards me. I go in for the hug, and after we greet she just says, "Do you remember what you've done to me?" I was baffled. We dated many years ago, and we never had any issues of any kind, no major fights, no abuse, no toxicity. As a matter of fact, she left me because I would not commit, but remained on good terms for a while, after still hanging out until she found a job abroad and left. At first I was scared shitless and immediately thought there was something strange. I asked her to be more specific, but she wasn't telling. After a little chit-chat, she told me she was referring to the time me and a friend cleansed her house. It came back to me then. At the time we were stupid, edgy, semi-goth kids, really into the weird and otherworldly stuff. After she complained about feeling her house was weird, a friend from our group offered to do some cleansing ritual, which he did while we were basically half drunk, according to her. When 7 years later she talked about this thing with other people started to hit the fan. Like you could feel presence around the house, drops of temperature, all the good stuff. She was very vague, but apparently she believes some kind of ghost is now possessing her house, something apparently unleashed after that thing we did, and she started telling her friends about it because nothing happened in the years prior. She then got back to England, but promptly came back here to escape from an abusive fiancé. At that point, I was really nervous and I excused myself. She hugged me, says now there's only Christ in her heart and that we should really have a cup of coffee. This gave me really weird vibes, like weird cult stuff. I basically ran away terrified. Keeping mind we split on good terms, very good. She looked after my dog while I was in England as a masseuse. She took care of my back for months. She even introduced me to her new boyfriend, and we went out for dinner a couple of times as a group. There is no way she could have held animus against me. Hell, once abroad she even offered to help find a job for me in the city she was currently living in. This was not a prank done to get back at me, and more so her eyes. She once was the light of the room, always laughing and cracking jokes. The person I found was sad with very still eyes, not smiling or anything. It was like she was a completely different person. For a bit of context, my dad and I live together in our own multi-family home in Germany. My dad has a serious lung condition. His lungs produce and trap an excessive amount of mucus. The trap amount is huge and keeps his lungs from working correctly. It's pretty normal that he has to be picked up by an ambulance every 2 to 3 weeks because he can't breathe anymore. Last week, it was that time of the month he couldn't breathe. I called an ambulance. He was brought to the closest hospital. Pretty normal for me because this happened at least 10 times in the last 6 months. So I went to bed after he got picked up. I went to work the next morning and got a text from him saying that he has to stay for at least 2 more days. Wednesday evening I got home from work and played a match of Rogue Company when someone suddenly rang the doorbell. That's unusual because we never have unannounced visitors. I walked to the door and was about to press the door buzzer to open the main door when I heard, I believe, at least more than one voice directly in front of my door, so that someone just got past the main door. Weird. I asked in German, of course, hello, who is it? Silence for 3 seconds, then a person who sounds like my father but at the same time doesn't sound like my father answers, Micah, it's me, I forgot my key. Open the door. I thought, okay, in that case, wait a minute, my dad never calls me Micah, only Mikey, and there was that sarcastic tone in that voice. I didn't trust the situation. I called my father on his phone. If the person in front of my door was my father, his phone should ring. Right, well, it didn't. Big. My father answered, and as I suspected, he was still in the hospital. Meanwhile, the 2 persons on the other side of the door heard my phone call and started to try to kick my door in. Let me in, Micah. It's your daddy, let me in. Thank God that door is reinforced. After I threatened them with calling the police and having a big-ass knife in my hand, they left. I heard their footsteps running down the staircase. I rushed to a window facing the street to see if maybe I could see a car or a license plate. Nothing, just a few footsteps in the distance. They never came back. What's weird is that they knew my name and that my father wasn't home, despite his car standing in the driveway was hitting the fan. When a buddy reported something similar, we called the police, and investigation is in progress. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have a scary story you'd like me to read on the channel, please send me an email or post it to my subreddit. You can find details of this In the video description, it's the stories that make this, and this is the best way to ensure variety in the stories I share. Thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to my channel members and patrons who now have special access to Adri videos and other behind-the-scenes content. Grant Braun 2. Autumn Moon, Christina Caleri NYX, The Wandering Triathlete, Tora Williams MOX, Ro Harper Pretty and Pink, Johnny C, Kim Thompson, Kristen Collins and Sherry Smith, Felicia Taser, Shannon Evans, Amy Chambers, Adam Arist, Alexander Wilson, Calamity Jade, Morin Bound, Gardner, Tyson, Alan, Tyler Wilson, Alexandria Bankets, me, Ryan Trevor, Blockley, Cassandra Bricker, Wyatt Patties, Nisa Cara, Yashril L. Deb Foster, Kathleen Greer, Ly Me, Ryan Chris, Len Joe, Jordan Lees, Mendoza Brooke, Nikki Bundrant, Thomas Diddle, The Terra Brooke, Nikki Bundrant, Thomas Diddle, Jennifer Chamberlain, Denise Watson, Zero Byte, Erica Air, Forgotten Ruins TV Night, Shadow Healing with E. Talisha Cluss, Donna Cox Holy, Crusader Sheila Grant 44, Julie Hyen, Stephanie McLaren, Janet Mills, Rice Bob, Jeff Masterin, Hoy, Denise Watson, Rose, Cassandra Wyatt, Travis Smith, Zoe D. Cat, Phil and Melissa Fun, Lorna Clark, Kathy Richmond, Natasha Hensley, Jalisa Ferguson, Leah McBride, Emily Pearson, Tyler Wilson, Lynn Me, Kristen Berto, Shazbetty, Brentley Candice, Lee Africa, Winfield, Becca Lydia Adams, Girl Veteran Legends, CBZ 69, 2012, Katrina King, Hospital Cakewalk, Dirty Diana, Quenta Siegel, Shirley Port Taylor, Ruist Anna, Lisa Petrie, Jasmine Davis, Janelle Jensen, Jasper Roth, Alex Monica Levels, James Gargano, Sarah P. Fire 5 Mad is a Felter, Tiara Sanders, Melissa Kinger, Kitty Cat, Luna 2, Chelsea Muffet, Ryan Gabriel, J. Benny, Sarah Zepp Tay, Sarah C. Sam, Amanda Jane, Vampy Debs, October Gypsy, Rebecca, Erica B. Maribel DeLuna, Lloyd Rash, Jennifer Jenkins, Kelly Townsend, Mary Wright, Tara Harris, Elizabeth Knapp, Eddie Sean Gorman, Sue Gordon, Spiders Web K, Christy Absent, Alice, Dina Kingery, Snowball Raina, Lady Dreer, Brenda Pretty, Girl 215, Amber Davis, Sigma Cube X, Letitia Ackland, Ollie O'Neill, Gina Art Lily, Pad Ashley Nicole, Sarah Chalo, May 2nd, 2003, Bella Place 2006, Skin Crawler, Stephanie McLaren, Borderline, Betty Kuro, Top Off, Kelly Annie Bain, Michael O'Malley, Neil Kavanaugh, The Dead Movie Society, Diana Johnston, T. Adwell, Danielle Possum Posey, Crafty Kell, Brooke Scott, Mackenzie, Megan Abrams, Jane Wiggins, Jasmine Davis, Jack White, Your Papy Dilly, Emma Lays, Tanya Ferguson, The Wendy Ember Hops, Alexia Tuttle, Ramtron, Elizabeth Mays, Unladylike 13, Pegasus Genesis, Sheila Grant 44, Sona Scout Mom 405, Cheryl Duckworth, Ashley Bray, Angela Reeves, Kim Thompson, Brock Ballard, Nick Bosey, Jessica Lay, Yennefer, Clary Scott, Timothy Stratton, Melissa Kinger, Shane Stevens, Serge Vargas, Bart In Real Life, Abil Jordan, Lisa Apprentice, Mason Hayes, Sarah Price, Jasmine Thomas, Angie Lind, Z Harris, Kirby Harris, Willow Sapium Lavina, Cordelia Misty, Michelle Green, Dixie Busby, Pa Ferreira, Nez Samantha, PL Donna Cox, Stephen Wheeler, Melissa Moore, Dessa Edmondson, This Bad Kitty, Gloria, Christina Myway, Connie Sue, Carol Zano, Merciful Humming, Keela Rundle, Ashley J. Vicky Howell, Joe Tour, Zoe D. Nicholas Johnson, Kimmy Love. Once again, thank you guys for listening. Have a great night.